What's going on, Realm? All right, so here's the rules of engagement for this show. All right, so I will say it again at the beginning of the show, but I want to make it clear here too. Megan does work for Obsidian, but I don't want people thinking we're just gonna blave her with questions in the chat that we know for a fact she can't answer. This is about her writing life, about what it takes for a developer to be a writer. I know the view's going to be low on this one because it's going to be more educational than entertainment-wise, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But, you know, we're going to make it fun, though. You guys know how I am. I'm going to make it fun, and I hope you guys enjoy. there something going on with the chat, Nick? Next, I don't see anything yet, but I'm not really paying attention to 100% of things going on right now. This is kind of done at the last minute a little bit. Our guest should be here momentarily, so keep that in mind. You know, I got the waiting room on, so I see when she pops up, so I can mute the chat. You know, I want to engage a little bit. Don't want you guys sitting in that starting soon screen too much. Oh, yeah, I mean, oh, okay. I get what you're saying now. You know, like I said, for those of you who don't know, share the podcast on Twitter. Do whatever you guys can. Get these numbers. You know, I know when it comes to educational videos, because we're going to go over a lot of, you know, a lot of questions revolve writing. It doesn't really relate to a lot of people, and I understand that. So I do feel like I am going to have to find another way of doing these type of videos that's not the Addict Show, because you guys want the Addict Show. You want us talking. You know, you want me and Hustle shooting it up. That's what you guys want, and I respect that. So, you know, I'll probably do another show whenever I have these type of stuff, and it will be closer to like maybe the end of the week when I do have them, like on a Friday, because I do have the Addict Spotlight. For any of you long-term listeners, you guys know that I do have that, so that's where I'll probably make these into that. But right now, I gotta see exactly what I do with these, man. I'm excited. I'm waiting for Megan to get in here. She's a busy person, man. She's a busy person. Once she gets here, we'll start. I'm assuming she'll be here in like the next 10 minutes. So, you know, we're gonna have a good time, man. You know, put in the comment section below if there's any particular questions that you guys would want me to ask. Now, obviously, I'm not gonna ask all of them. I might answer some of them, ask her some of them, just depending on what the questions are. And keep in mind, it's got to be related a lot to the writing portion of her job. Okay, Addict, while we have time, can you tell us how you make the green screen? Oh my god. That is not me. I don't walk around like that, man. It's not me. I don't have fire around me, man. I'm not on fire, Nix. I'm not on fire. Actually, I'm kind of a blank at who made that intro. I'm gonna be real with you guys. It's kind of a blank. I can't remember who made it. We have a lot of people make stuff. I think it was Shaun Labrie. But I don't know. Megan Stark is a senior writer on the Obsidian team. She writes for the Outer Worlds. That's the team she writes for. But like I said, you know, we're this podcast is going to be directed around that particular role. I got a lot of good questions for her. You know, I spent a good hour and a half writing questions and deleting questions, because there are some questions that I like to ask, but you know, obviously I don't want to dig too much into the Outer Worlds. I want to use it more as a reference point than anything, because here's the thing that I do, and like I said, I'm going to go over all of this when the show starts. I feel like we're even guilty. We have a lot of developers on. We have a lot of industry people, but it's always about, you know, for the company they work for. And I want to do more to give back to the people who... Okay, she's here. I'll talk to you guys in a minute. What's going on, guys? Addict Show. I apologize for the tardiness. I'll take all the blame for that.
No, that's totally my fault.
So,
Sorry.
how we're going to do this, all right? First off, I've said this multiple times on the starting soon screen, but some of you guys are stubborn. I don't care if you super chat anything. We're not answering questions about Outer Worlds 2. Because these people, they thirsty, man. They do whatever they can. Whatever they can. We will not be asking questions about stuff related to that. For the most part, we won't even really be talking about the Cynia projects. We might use stuff that happened in the first one as like an objective standpoint, but we're not talking about anything. It's going to be about the writing. And the reason I'm making these segments is I do feel like a lot of you on Twitter. I feel like a lot of you feel like you can do Jaws better than other people, and it's not really our fault. I do feel like we need to ask people more questions. We need to be enlightened, more educated on the matter. So that's what I'm doing, man. This is the day in the life of a senior writer in the gaming industry. What's funny, Megan? When I was doing the title on YouTube, I was like, I don't know if I want to put Obsidian in the title, so I just used your name. I didn't put Obsidian.
Oh, sure. It's fine either way. I mean, it's not like we'd come after you.
Well, it's not that. It's just.
But it's not about that topic.
I know.
Yeah,
I know how PR is. And part of the reason I want to do this too is I want to give an outlet to where it feels like we having, because even the Iron Lords podcast, no one does it on purpose, but it's like you were on the show to talk about your job. You know what I'm saying? To talk about working for Obsidian. And I feel like there's not a lot of opportunities for devs to come on and just talk about them as a person. You know what I'm saying? That's another reason I'm doing this, because I'm more curious on the dev side than anything else, but I don't really get to like stretch that muscle too much. So it's going to be nice to have a good conversation. But so first off, we'll get into like the opening stuff, Megan. Like what are you playing here lately? Any type of games that you like? Are you playing here that's released?
Well, most recently I was playing Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, which I really like because I'm a big Borderlands fan anyway. I've heard recently, like when I've talked to people, it seems like Borderlands humor or the IP is very like hit or miss for folks. They either love it or hate it, but I've always been like pretty big fan. I was enjoying that. I like the couch co-op. There's kind of limited amount of games you can play couch co-op on. And before that, I was pretty into Hades. I put a lot of hours into that, which I was late to the game. I think I was like 2 years late to playing that, but it was really fun.
Yeah, Hades is a pretty fun game. I like the art style and not a lot of type of gameplay like that really resonate with me, but I don't know why. Maybe it's just because that's like mythology, and because of games like God of War, I grew up with that kind of Greek mythology.
Well, I was just blown away that game only had one writer, and I was like, oh my gosh, like hats off to that guy. That's really impressive.
Person was probably writing 24/7.
I know, right? The way that they did it was really interesting too, because you can tell that it must have been like just tons and tons of like Excel sheets or however they organize it with all these conditionals on it, and then it's plugged in and then they fire, randomly. And I just thought it was really cool.
Yeah. So, we're going to go ahead and rotate, because obviously I don't want to keep you too long. You work enough. First thing I would like to know is, we obviously have a lot of going into a lot of different roles at different companies in general. I want to know what it's like for a day as Megan, as being a senior writer. What's like the day-to-day life when it comes to that kind of term?
Well, it kind of depends at what point in the project we're on, because sometimes I'll just be a senior narrative designer. Sometimes I'm strike team lead. Sometimes I'm in charge of people making, a zone in the game or a feature like companions. But just from the writing perspective, I guess it would be like come in, check your email, see if there's anything that's like jumped to the top of the to do or you need to respond to. Check when your meetings are. You'll typically be assigned to either like some studios call them pods, some call them strike teams, but it's typically like a narrative designer, an area designer, an environment artist, and maybe like a QA person. And you guys are a group and you're in charge of either a feature or an area of the game. And you're going to meet regularly and develop all the content in there, like in sync with each other. So you might have meetings where you're discussing what's the next thing we're working on or what's the status of this task. And then, yeah, I just have different, types of tasks. Like lately it's been a lot of conversations for characters. So, like quest giver, vendors, dungeon villains, stuff like that. And then I just get latest, open up tools, do my writing, and play test it.
Oh, that's interesting. I've always, we'll get into that a little bit about like the cooperations between you and other departments. I've always wondered like how in depth that is, but I do have a question related to that. So, just so the audience knows, what projects have you worked on in the gaming industry?
So previously, my first job was at Icarus Studios working on Fallen Earth, which was a post-apocalyptic MMO. Hold on. I'm like, are you seeing my like work messages pop up? I might need to close out of this program. Okay, so I was like, people are messaging me like, oh, hey, by the way. Okay. After that, I worked on at Carbine Studios on WildStar, and then after that, I came to Obsidian. I worked on Tyranny. I worked on Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire. I worked on the Outer Worlds, and then I worked on both of the Outer Worlds DLCs, and now I'm on the Outer Worlds sequel.
That's just for the viewership wise. I do okay. Like as far as you've worked on the Outer Worlds for a good amount of time. Has there ever been a popular franchise that you've seen that you was just like, you've always been curious off of maybe a certain writing portion that you saw, maybe a certain character development in a game, then you was like, you've been very curious and that you would actually like to work for that team on that game if you ever had a chance? Was there any franchise that you could think of?
Yeah, I mean, I have a ton of games that I play, and I just feel like I'm a huge fan. I've always liked, mentioned before, Borderlands. I've always liked BioShock. I've always liked Fallout. Most recently, Control. Absolutely, got obsessed with that. So I feel like any of those type of games would just be super fun to work on. Also, I like X-Men, and so the Wolverine game that they're making I think looks really cool, but again it's I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing now, so that's more just I guess if you're gonna imagine, ooh, what would it be like if I wanted to work on a project like that or whatever, any of those would be super exciting.
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to especially RPGs, I feel like writing in those would be crazy and it'll keep you busy. It'll keep you busy, man. It'll keep you busy. What about when it comes to RPGs? I want to specialize a little bit on RPGs because you've been working on the most. You did mention Fallout. Is there any other type of huge RPGs that you've played over the years that you would like to work with?
I've literally put no joke because you can see the stats when you load up a save file or whatever. I've put 400 hours into Witcher 3 with their DLCs, and I heard they're making another DLC, so I'm like, yeah. I played Cyberpunk. I enjoyed it, but it didn't I didn't get obsessed with it the same way that I did with Witcher 3. But I mean, everyone has their own preferences, so that's more just a flavor thing.
Yeah, I hear you on that. All right, so when it comes to The Witcher, what is some characters in The Witcher 3 that you really gravitated towards?
This is controversial. This is fandom stuff. I really like Yennefer. I know she's a lot of people love or hate her. I like Yennefer. I like Ciri. I like Geralt. All of the Witchers in both the game and the television series I think are really cool. The more of them, the better.
Yeah, I feel like Ciri's in particular, she's a really unique character. Takes on a different aspect of just about everything. I really like how the TV show has filled more lore behind everyone. I know some people don't like it, some people do. I've always been the kind of person when it comes to any type of TV entertainment, I've always been that I'm trying to be unbiased as possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, stuff like Halo, I was very vocal about. But
Mm.
speaking of Xbox in general, they got a lot of studios now, and now let's get away from RPG and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Any studio Microsoft has that if you were decided that I want to go somewhere else, and you had the opportunity to go anywhere in Xbox and all their studios, what's the one that you'd be more open to doing? Because there's a lot, and we won't use the Activision one, so just the studios that they currently have now. What's the studio that you've always like, you know what, that would be fun to write with?
I mean, I think like I kind of had my pick, and I was lucky to get in an Obsidian. I wouldn't leave it. So it's hard to imagine, like, if for some reason I was ever like, oh, hey, because you're already at Microsoft and you're staying here, but we also want you to write for whatever project. Yeah, I mean, I think anything that Bethesda or Arcane is putting out is really
Arcane.
cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed Prey. Obviously Dishonored, although that's France. Those are really cool, and I'm interested to play. My brain is blanking. Is it Redfall? Or sorry,
Mhm.
I'm messing that up. Okay, yeah. I was like, I saw the trailer of that. Looked really cool. I'd heard a little bit about it before I saw the trailer, but I thought, yeah, I'm definitely going to play that as well. So, but I guess those are a little bit similar. Like, I do like the RP, genre, so it's kind of in the same vein.
Yeah, I actually, I'm a huge fan of Arcane. Actually, like I really love Dishonored. I love Deathloop. I felt like the
Oh,
writing in
yes,
Deathloop
that
was
was
really
also
good. The
really
writing
good.
in
Yes,
Deathloop was really good. All
that
right,
was
so
also France. Yeah.
let's go ahead and get into the nitty gritty, man. Let's
Hmm.
obviously there's all types of different characters you can write being a writer, especially in the gaming industry. What is that one type of writer when you're writing a character of some of sort that you would think is the hardest in general? Like what type of character that would be a difficult write that you would have to take on?
I really think it's different per writer. Like every writer has their own strengths and weaknesses and their own personal interests. And also a lot of it can be based off of like, your life experiences and the type of media and, other writing and shows and stuff that you like to consume. So for me, I particularly like to write like anti-hero and villain type characters. It's a little bit harder for me to write like a typical like goody goody white knight. But I feel like with most people, it's like the opposite, where they kind of gravitate more towards like it actually would have been really difficult for me to write Parvati and do her justice in the way that Kate did, because
Mm-hmm.
Parvati is such a sweet, like supportive, multi-layered, interesting character that I probably would have fumbled it, honestly. But writing a robot who doesn't care if you go on a murder spree or whatever is much easier for me. But yeah, for other people, they might not enjoy writing villains the same way. So I think it kind of just depends on your personal interests and what you've practiced and stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, anti-hero. I'm sure that that's a pretty fun area to explore because, like, if you stick to like a typical hero or typical villain, you kind of got to go one way or the other. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you could start to branch a little bit, but like when you dig these personalities, like by lore wise and by what makes sense, they're gonna go left or right again. But when it comes to like an
Mm-hmm.
anti-hero, like you can just wake up. Okay, I feel like this particular scene, he's gonna be straight left and then straight right
Mm-hmm.
the week after. I've always felt like when it comes to anti-heroes, like they're always uniquely written
Yeah.
because at any time they could go anywhere you would never expect it. So I like that. I like that. That's a nice little touch. You know, I obviously with RPGs, we've talked a lot about RPGs, but one thing I'm curious about is, let's say that you end up eventually wanting to go into another genre. Is there ever a type of other genre that you'd like? Action adventure. We even talk about, I would say probably RTSs, because I would say, look, the gameplay is not really particularly the thing that you would deal with, but when you make a story, you obviously we'll get into the collaborations between departments. But is there ever another genre that has interest you, like Uncharted, The Last of Us
Yeah.
lanes?
I think genre for video games is a little bit different than genre for like novels. So like a lot of times in novels, if you're talking about genre, you're straight up saying like, oh, is this sci-fi? Is this cyberpunk? Is this fantasy?
Mm-hmm.
But like with video games, a lot of times it's like, what is the type of combat? What is the type of gameplay? And then within that, what is is it a fantasy setting? Do you have a predefined hero? Is it a linear story? Is it branching dialogue? I think for me, the type of combat and type of gameplay experience, I wouldn't be like, oh, I prefer this over another. But if I was going to try something else, I think it would be pretty cool to do a linear story, something very cinematic, kind of like Uncharted or Last of Us. Or even, Control was a little bit in that vein, I would say. So I just thought those experiences are pretty cool. And I haven't actually written on them before because I mostly did MMOs, and then now I'm doing RPGs. So that would be a new adventure for me.
Yeah, and I think linear projects too, you would have, obviously, like, going into the branching things that most typical RPGs do. You can't really, like, completely go one direction because you always have to give the characters multiple directions. So I feel like because I always felt like certain games that drive away and try to give them more of an open dialogue stuff, it's like I always felt like it didn't make sense for certain scenes, like because when a linear thing, the reason people love Joel, the reason people love Ellie, the reason people love Nathan Drake, Lara Croft, because the writers were able to write the story in such a way because there was a bunch of branching options. And I feel like RPGs make sense, because you want to give the player as much options as possible because that's generally what an RPG is. But when it comes to like linear stuff, you want to tell a story. That's the number one focus over everything. I would say probably gameplay, but we're talking about writing. So as far as telling the story, that is the most important thing. And I think in RPGs, it's kind of the story's important, but options is the most important thing to an RPG. And I think that's probably why a lot of writers might want to write a linear, because they would feel like they can go complete extra on a story because they know that every person is going to come across that story, not just the people that go down that branch.
That's true. I think both have their like strengths and weaknesses or unique challenges, right? So it could be a little bit of a grass is greener. Like when you're working on a branching game or a game that has to account for so many different, like, did the player do this but not that, or are they this build? And any one thing you add, like say I was like, oh, it would be really cool if you can read this report that this other character wrote. Well, now I need the option to go back to that character and say, hey, I found this thing, let's talk about it, right? So like any little thing you want to add, it has like a domino effect of like, now you got to make sure all these other things account for it. So, and you have to, like, when you're building out a conversation, go, okay, well, what if the player goes here, 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 but not there? So maybe you have like 8 different routes through a conversation. You have to count for all those. It can seem like a lot of moving parts and be like, oh, it can be overwhelming. Wouldn't it be so easy if like there was only one route? But I think when you're looking at a linear game where the focus is on the cinematic story and having a really strong protagonist and a really strong conflict that they have to overcome, it's almost like Eye of Sauron, or like you have to be like the top 1%. Like it has to be immaculate, so like you might be working on the same thing over and over and over and scrapping it and revising it and just having like multiple versions of that one thing that's trying to push it towards perfection. So I think it's actually probably very similar, just different methods.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with you on that. And His famous line is just one, because he feels like those type of games, especially because that story narrative, do really good. So I've always wondered this, and I don't know how this works, but for years I've wondered this. When you're making a story, what comes first? The world that the story's being told in, or the story that the world is being told in. Like I'm kind of I don't know if you like understand that. I didn't really say it the way I said in my mind. Like, let's say you have a world. I feel like I don't know if development process is to develop the world first or develop the story and the artists create the world off of what what the story inclines, if that makes sense. How does that generally go? Is it generally like I would feel like it varies, but in your experiences from working with other departments, do you have a lot of input on how they do stuff like that? And as far as the world creation, do you have any input on that as well?
I think it depends on how high level you're looking at. So if it's something like, the game creators, in the very beginning, and literally it's like blank page, nothing has been defined. Like I would actually be interested to find out, like, to ask Tim and Leonard, like, did you decide on like the world and the setting and then the storyline? I would imagine they probably started with that, was saying like, hey, this is the type of world or the type of universe that this is going to live in, and then within that, what type of stories can we tell? Because it's just, you always have to put some constraints on it. You have to pick a direction and start to define it and like make a little box for yourself. Otherwise, you could never like move forward or get anything done. So I think they would probably pick some constraints like that and then decide what type of story to tell within that. It could easily go the other way, like a different type of creator on a different game. Maybe he had an idea for the main character and their struggle, and then just built a world around that. I think either would work. When you get down to the smaller level, a lot of times we've already defined, like, these are the areas you can go to in the game, and then within that we decide, these are the characters that are going to show up here, and this is the type of things the player is going to do. So I do think a lot of times it can be more what worlds are you building first? Yeah.
Yeah, what's funny is I've seen a lot of, especially writing teams, use what I like to call the Rico board, where it's like, how like the FBI try to take down people and they have like a giant board with like connecting dots to everyone. Yeah. It's like, I've seen so many like writing teams have something similar. It's like, this is the writing portion, and then it has like a line that goes to this. I think that's unique, and I like stuff like that. All right, so I'm kind of curious on this. Now, obviously, we were talking about type of gameplay that's in gaming. Does the writers have any impact into that whatsoever? On because to me, like we were talking about the linear thing, it would determine how you write a story off the type of gameplay it is. So it is when a writer is brought on board for something like a project, is that already predetermined, or does everyone come together to talk about that type of thing before you write a story related to how the combat would particularly be? Because you can only write the story, but I do feel like as far as the player, it would depend on how that combat's done to really hyphen that story that you're writing. Do you have any type of input on that at all?
Yes, I think it can go either way, and a lot of times it does. Sometimes, combat team will say, hey, we have villain and they can fly, or, they float in this stage. And then you're like, okay, let me figure out a way to write that into the storyline and kind of foreshadow it, and so it doesn't just come out of nowhere. Or, let me write combat lines that back that up. Sometimes, like, for example, on the DLC Murder on Eridanos, because we knew it was like a murder mystery and we wanted players to be able to role play like what type of detective they are. We thought, well, it'd be really cool if you had like a sci-fi gadgety magnifying glass. And then we asked, the systems team, like we worked with them to create the discrepancy amplifier and like how that would work. Oh, my poor kitty. He tried to jump on the desk and didn't quite make it. And so, and normally my desk is like lower down when I'm writing, but it's standing desk right now. But anyway, so we worked with them to say like, how should this work? What does it look like when you find evidence in the game? And that was really like the story requesting a gameplay element added. But a lot of times the gameplay element is already there, and then it's your job to like explain that and make it fit in with the world and build that into the experience narratively.
So pretty much what you're saying is it's a mixture of both. Sometimes it's a predetermined thing, then maybe midway through something gets added, and then they're like, yo, we got this boss that floats, can we add him in some way? And then you got to go back to the drawing board and find a way that makes sense to put that particular person in the game.
Yep, exactly.
That's interesting. I would just walk in the one that has there. That's interesting. I actually like that because it shows that you guys are, what's the word I'm looking for? At any time something can change, and you can easily. Well, no, I'm not gonna say easily, but you could go back to the drawing board and make sure that person makes sense into it. You know, as far as like you look at positive characters like Resident Evil with like Wesker, like those characters are probably predetermined for years. But you know, the chick that's with Wesker in Resident Evil 5, maybe she wasn't, and she had to put in at the last minute. So that's interesting, and I would say that happens a lot with like side characters and certain side quests. You know, we were talking about departments and stuff. I'm curious, like, what's the departments that you work with the most?
Definitely area design, or you know, some studios call it like level design, game design. Basically anyone who's your content creator, who's like, you know, making the quest work and building the level that you're running through. Also environment art, or some studios just call it like world art or world builders, which is, you know, anybody who's like putting the trees in and adding your set dressing and making it look nice. Because you have to talk with them about, this is, you know, what the building is and the purpose that it serves, and let's make sure that it all fits in the story. And like a lot of times they will, you know, push that forward, and then I'm just there to go like, yeah, that's great, or actually that wouldn't make sense because of this other thing, you know, to provide context. But so it really depends on the specific piece of content that you're making. Like one person might have more of an idea or ownership that's pushing it forward, and the other people are there just to support that and kind of reference it, and then it kind of varies.
I'm actually curious, has there ever been like something that you've written in a game and the artist comes back with what their description of what you've written, and then you was like, and you had like key components that you would want changed, that like that wasn't the thing that you envisioned? Yes.
Well, this is like a minor thing, but and honestly, like back then I probably should have just changed it on my end, but like, you know, it's a lot newer. But like, for example, super minor version of like how this can work. On Tyranny, I was writing one of the companions, Kills in Shadow, and I wrote that she had like red eyes, and when the art went into the game, she had yellow eyes, and I was like, do you mind? You know, I know all the other beast people have yellow eyes, but like I think it would be cool to help her stand out. And like it would have been easy for me to just go in and change my description in the writing. So if art had like pushed back on that, I could have done that, but they were like, yeah, sure, we'll just change your eye color. And so that's like a tiny example, but that can happen on a larger level too, for sure.
That's it. That's cool. All right,
sorry, just real quick to add, I think it is important for someone working in the industry, like if you guys are considering it and you want to work, it's important to be collaborative and compromise and go back and forth. So like sometimes the artist might go, yeah, no problem. But if they say like, hey, my schedule won't really allow for it, you know, there's other higher priority things, I think it's important for you not to like be too precious about any one thing. You know, like if you can afford to make the change and it makes someone else's life easier, then that goes a long way.
Yeah, especially like, you know, something as eye color would probably be a lot easier to change,
like, that'd be easy.
Than you just like, I don't like the outfit they have on, because then that's a different story. That might take a lot longer than just changing an eye color. And plus, you know, it's like you said, when it comes to little stuff like that, in the over perspective of things, like, you know, in hindsight, a couple years from now, is it worth the effort to change?
Well, also, every single thing that goes into a game essentially like has an order of priority of like, there's only so much amount of time to make things, and there's like this never-ending list, and anything on the bottom is not making it in, it's getting cut, right? So like you kind of have to think about where your stuff stacks up in that in comparison to other things. So if it's like something really important, like this is integral to this storyline or this companion or whatever, then maybe you guys talk it out or have meetings and decide what's going to happen and what else has to get cut to make this thing happen. Or you just go like, it's not that important compared to everything else, let's just get rid of it or do what we can. Yeah,
and plus, you know, development in general is about time. You know, time equals money. Time, you got deadlines that you have to make, so sometimes you have to look at something, because we interviewed Undead Labs once, and they said that they had a lot more stuff they want to do with like vehicle combat and stuff, but
Hmm.
when it came down to it, it's like, you're in a zombie apocalypse. Does it even really make sense that you're able to do something like that anyway? So they
Yeah.
ended up cutting a lot of that from the game. So I can and I think that would be like a hit and miss with me, like something that you really was filling, and then again ended up getting cut. But at the end of the day, that's the job. Like at any
Hmm.
time, something that you could have probably written for weeks could be cut from the game.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, so I got a curious question. Now, obviously, I'm sure you've seen. You said earlier that you were a huge fan of like Bethesda games. Obviously, Fallout 4, we had the protagonist had a voice. Uh,
Hmm.
Before that, none of them really necessarily did. From your perspective of writing, I don't know if you've ever written anything to that nature. Is it easier to write content, to write a game when the actual main character has a voice, or do you think that, especially RPGs, it's important to give that kind of role playing where they don't have that voice?
So I think there's a difference in the examples that you're pointing out. So Fallout 4 and Outer Worlds. So with Fallout 4, the players' lines were voiced. They were voice acted, but I wouldn't say that that was necessarily like a predefined character. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not on the same level of playing, Geralt. Um, Geralt is literally like he's a character. He has a set personality. The way he's going to respond to things, you can push him a little bit of like, is he being more patient or less patient? Is he like nice Geralt or like abrupt Geralt? But you don't get that full range of like, am I a full on psycho character or am I like a snarky mad scientist? Or, whereas I feel like even in Fallout 4, it's still you defining the character and role playing within like a set boundary of like, were you like the wife with the law degree or were you the
Mm-hmm.
the war hero, but within that it wasn't the same as like, oh, this is Ellie from, Last of Us and we know exactly what that means, so whether it's voice acted or not, I do think if the character itself is like more of an open book and the player is defining what that character is to them and who that character's personality is, you have to represent all different types and all different situations and really give the player choice to define that. If it's something more preset, like say, the Wolverine game that they're making right now, we know exactly who Logan is, like kind of what he talks like, what he sounds like, the type of choices he would make. Or even, the Spider-Man game that they did. It's like you have to study that and you have to be able to convincingly write that character so that other people go, yeah, that's right, or like, that's believable, or this feels right. So it's really your job to be able to conform to an existing IP and to be able to, craft a voice that is consistent with something that's already defined. And I would actually say this can be a little bit controversial how people feel about fanfic, but I would say if you're someone who like wants to work in video games and you like writing fanfic, don't feel bad about that at all because it's a great way to practice like, look, I can like write for characters who someone else created and I can convince other people like, yes, this is I know how to write and these are the characters, like it sounds correct. And it's a good way to practice all different types. And even if you don't do fanfic, if you just want to practice on your own, I would say take varied different IPs or characters and like practice writing their dialogue or scenes with them and being convincing in that. And then that will improve your skills or give you something that you can show off if you're applying to somewhere and show people like, yeah, if you ask me to write, Wolverine, I can do it because look, I was able to write all these other characters, like maybe look, I wrote some sample lines of Handsome Jack. That's original writing, but it sounds just like him, So
Mm-hmm.
that's a great exercise to do.
Yeah. So pretty much what I gathered from that is, when it comes
Rambling.
to yeah, when it comes to like writing, it makes more sense if the character has a voice, if the character already has predetermined history.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a character like the Fallout 4 character or the Dovahkiin or from certain other games, it they have a history, but it's not predetermined. You don't really have any way of knowing who they are, so it's okay to like let them wander on their own imagination. But when it comes to Gareth, if he starts sounding like something that doesn't make sense, you're gonna upset more people. Even though you gave other people freedom with him, you're gonna upset more people because that's not how he would act.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely understand that. All right, so obviously we know that you work on, the Outer Worlds. It's got a lot of branching paths in it. What are some of the difficulties making branching path options? Like, I feel like, you know, because like obviously we're talking about like anti-hero question, branching path. Sometimes you guys have like 3 or 4. Like it's kind of crazy, and it's like I said, it was like the Rico case where you have like all these branching paths. Like, what is some of the biggest difficulties you have making that? Because I'm sure that's not easy. Like in the grand scheme of things, after the whole project's done, I'm sure there's a lot of time that went into that.
Yeah, it is a lot of time. So, and it's a lot more words. It's a lot more tracking and using game logic and scripting and conditionals and stuff like that. So, for example, if you have this conversation that's got 400 nodes in it, maybe players only experience 100 of those nodes, or maybe only 50 of those nodes, but different players will experience different ones. So it's like you had to build out 400 just for a single player to go through it and make choices and hit the 50 that they're going to see in their one playthrough. You also have to track all the choices that they've made, including like their builds, their backgrounds, things they've done in the game previously, what companions they have with them, what they're wearing, what choices they've made within the conversation, what skills they have. And then based off of things that they've said in the conversation, you have to account for that later. So later on, the NPC is going to respond and react to that. And they have to react to all the different possible ones, but only show you the correct matched up version. And so it's a lot of like any one thing that you see in the game, there's probably like 4 to 8 versions of that, and you're seeing the one that corresponds to your specific unique playthrough.
Yeah, so playing a lot of, we'll take like an example of Obsidian, like certain guests will be with you and they'll acknowledge that they're there, so pretty much what you're saying is like you have to take that perspective and like, look, like right now we got this person with us, or we got that companion with us, but we have to also write, if we have varieties of every one of the other ones, I don't know if, I can't remember if there's ways in the Outer Worlds not to have companions. I'm pretty sure you could.
Yeah, so you have to account for you have no companions, or you have to account for which companions you have, and basically that requires you have a version and check for all companions, and then you have a version that checks for no companions. and
then though sometimes your companions will communicate with each other.
Yeah,
so
they'll talk to each other.
There's branching paths where you can have a certain, like, and obviously the majority of the time they're unique conversations. It's not like, they're saying the same 2 companions will say the same thing. You have a companion and then a different companion, the different time you go through, they're going to have a different conversation. I can't. That just makes my brain hurt to think of all that. Like, and
it is part of your job to hook it up and make sure it works correctly. So it's not just, writing the one line that Ellie says. You have to do every companion, and you have to hook it up to make sure the conversation connects properly and has the right conditionals or prerequisites, and then you have to test it all the different ways you could possibly go through the conversation.
And I'm assuming, like, because there's skill checks too through most of these type of games, and then you got to account for that. Like, it's got to read the game. Like, do they have this amount of skill? And then that might change the dialogue again, and then you have to do it again through this way. Like, that's crazy. I don't envy that, man. You guys are crazy for that.
But it is really fun, Like, you do have a lot of options when you're building out a conversation, so you can have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and especially being the robot too, you could say some off the wall stuff that wouldn't make sense to anyone else saying, but it's a robot, and I think that when you talk from a perspective of a non-human person, it's a lot easier to justify him doing anything you want him to because he's not human. That's interesting. All right, so obviously we were talking about like Last of Us and stuff like that. What I want to ask you is, from your perspective as a writer, what do you think is easier type of gameplay for you to get your writing across to the gamer the best? Like a first person or a third person type of game, third person view?
So I
Because
actually think the camera, it does not affect the story as much as maybe a different media. Um, yeah, because it really just depends on the type of story you're trying to tell and how much the character talks, right? So I guess if it's like a third person game where the person you control never says anything, that would be a lot more difficult than a first person game where you hear your character talking all the time as you're going through a level. But third or first person is kind of tied to like how close you are to that character, right? So in a novel, it can depend on like first person, you only have the information of that first person, the character who is telling you the story. You know what's going on in their head and their perception of the world, but you don't know anything else. In third person, in a novel, you could have limited to only that character, or you could know everything. You could know what every character is thinking all the time and like sprinkle that information throughout. In a video game, I feel like whether it's first person or not, you don't typically hear or know what other people are thinking unless they say it out loud. So like even it's very limited. You're not going to get a lot of like, omniscient, like the narrator is God. Some games do that actually, but it's a lot less common. So it's really just like, I think the camera view affects more your combat experience. I will say there are a few exceptions that stood out to me. If you played, I'm gonna blank on the title. Oh crap! Sorry, my brain.
what?
I can't believe I just had it. So it's a first person. You're experiencing the game. You basically go back to this island in a house where you grew up, and you're going through the house, and you're like unlocking all these different rooms. And as you do that, you see the story of how all the characters who lived in those rooms died, and you experience it first person through those characters. Is it the final something of? Sorry, my brain is terrible with this kind of stuff. I'll look it up later.
Eden Fitch.
Yes, thank you. I was like, I kept wanting to say like asshole, but I was like, that's not the right name. But anyway, yes, that game, I think the camera choice was very specific for the narrative. If you experience that game in a third person, it would not have the same sensation or emotional impact when you experience those like death scenes essentially, or like the like ominousness of going through the house. The fact that it's in first person makes it feel much more claustrophobic and emotionally heavy. So, but that was like, I think, a choice that was made to support the narrative that they were trying to tell. But a lot of games, like for example in Fallout 4, I think it's going to be the same narrative experience to you whether you're playing in the first person or the third person camera view.
Yeah, I've always felt like when it comes to first person versus third person, because I've always felt like set pieces make more sense in a third person view than, because there's set pieces in first person, but like Tomb Raider, Uncharted, like when you have those big epic set pieces, I feel like you have a lot more options in terms of how it looks and how it's presented if it is a third person. Now, I do like the set pieces in like Wolfenstein and stuff like that, because it's like, especially when he was going down the hallways in the wheelchair and stuff. Like I feel like action paces might do better in a first person perspective, because you're getting a little bit more immersive because you're actually that person. But as far as like environment set pieces, I feel like they're better in third, because you have a lot more access to the character because you're not in the character, if that makes sense.
Well, I also think it's been a while since I played it, so I feel like my memory is like gonna get it wrong, but I remember when I played the newer God of War, they were doing really interesting stuff with their camera too, where in the combat you were more of like a third person, right? And because it was like, oh, it's more convenient, makes the combat better, let's do that. But then in certain narrative heavy moments or emotional experience type thing, the camera did come in a lot closer and follow those characters in a cinematic manner.
It is interesting how certain developers do use both perspectives.
Hmm.
Like for certain things, like for instance, Destiny. I'm a huge Destiny fan, and the combat is all first person. But when
Hmm.
you pull out that sword, it goes third person naturally, and it's
Hmm.
like one of the only times in the perspective it isn't. That's mainly combat wise. At that time, I don't think they were really trying to learn how to make the sword look appealing in first person. So it was
Hmm.
more. It made more sense to make it third person. And I think it's like one of those things where it's like I think both games can do well. I think
Hmm.
Fallout does a good way of creating this world in first person. But keep in mind, a lot of these RPGs, especially, they give you the option to do both. But I do feel like a lot of these games might give you the option, but they were designed for one. It's just they're giving you
Yeah.
the option to do the other.
Well, yeah, I think for me the interesting aspect of it is what is the camera doing and when, because even a game like Cyberpunk, a lot of their cinematic stuff was still third person. Depending, you could see your character, or you'd be like third person walking up to it, and then you would sit down and maybe you'd only see your hands drinking a glass. But then at certain points in certain scenes, the camera would actually still show you. And so it
Mm-hmm.
was really interesting what they're doing there. So more so than like just straight up first or third, like you would see in a novel, which like those are kind of your main choices. I think here it's like, what is the camera doing? How close is it? Is it up high? Is it low? Can you see yourself or not? Like, and those all have different effects on the experience for the player in that moment.
You know what's did you play It Takes Two and A Ways Out?
Yes.
I feel
I
like
didn't
that's
finish it yet, but I was really enjoying it. That's
I,
also couch co-op.
yeah, I feel like that's a perfect example of everything come together making sense because
Hmm.
especially like in A Ways Out, there's a scenario where one character is up fighting some individual on like a crane and the other character is running around the crane trying to catch up to him and the camera's panning back and forth showing where they are, and then once you get to the end, like the camera's like this small for one and like this small for the other. Like that is a unique way of using a camera angle
Yeah.
that would make more sense off what they needed and not off what they
Hmm.
have.
Yeah, and that's also a unique discipline at a lot of studios to be, a cinematic designer or, the person who's in charge of the camera in different moments of the game. So if that's something that really interests you, it's a career route that, anyone could look into and become an expert in and then build that in different games, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, so what is obviously with the pandemic and stuff that happened. What was some key things that changed for you as a writer? Like, was there a lot of hiccups, or because I know some studios was a little bit more, remote ready than other studios, but how was it for the writing portion? Like, was there like a lot more? I wouldn't say like red flags or red tape, but was there a lot more? Because obviously you guys are working with highly sensitive stuff. Was there did it make it a lot harder for you to write for something like The Outer Worlds, being in a work environment?
I actually don't think so at all. I think some departments it was a lot harder for them, but for narrative design and writing, at least what I experienced, it was pretty seamless to switch to a virtual environment. Because it's like, okay, we were having meetings in person, writing on a whiteboard, or now we're having meetings on a video call like this, and someone's writing down notes, or there's a whiteboard in the background. So it wasn't all that different. Also, a lot of what we do is we meet with the different people involved, talk about all the stuff. Maybe one person's play testing, everybody else is watching it. And then you go back and you do your individual work. I pull up the tool and I check out the files and I do my work and then I test it and I check it in and then everybody else can see it. So it was like whether I was doing that in the physical office or my home office here, it didn't change too much.
All right, so I do have a couple questions I see in the chat. I picked out the ones that make sense. Obviously, we're not asking crazy questions. Was gaming her first choice when writing, when learning to write? Was that the first avenue that you wanted to go into?
I'm so old that it was not even like I didn't even realize game writing was a thing when I really got into writing, I want to say when I was I mean, it kind of started when I was like, I don't know, 11 or 12, when you start exploring like, oh, I'm writing little stories and stuff like that. And then when I was 15, I was doing it a lot, like writing short stories with original characters, writing a lot of fan fiction. Like me and my friends at school would like write in a notebook and pass it in class and try not to have the teacher catch it, you know. So back then, I had video games, but a lot of it was like, you know, Nintendo, you know, like Mario or Yoshi's Island or, you know, Desert Strike, stuff like that. So I wasn't thinking a lot. The first game that I really played that I thought, wow, this is like, it has a impressive story, and it's just because I didn't play the earlier ones, unfortunately, but the first one I played was Final Fantasy X, and I remember thinking like, this is
I'm playing that game right now.
Yeah, it really impacted me, and so that probably started me down the route of like, man, you know, video game writing is like a thing just as much as film or television or novels or comics. And you know, when I was in college, I was doing creative writing, again, focusing on fiction. You know, like at that time, they didn't have video game writing classes that I could take. I could take, you know, poetry, I could take nonfiction, I could take fiction, which would be short stories or novels, or there was one film writing class that I took. And when I was in grad school, after going to conventions, I made friends with an artist, a concept artist who worked at EA, and she was like, well, you know, you love, you know, Fallout and Bioshock and stuff like that. Why don't you just try to write for them? Because I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to get a job? So that kind of started me down that route of like, yes, I would like to do that because I enjoy game stories so much, and I think it would be really cool. There were not a lot of studios back then who hired a lot of writers. It would kind of be like, oh, there's like one or two at the entire studio. But eventually got my foot in the door and have just kind of, you know, worked my way in the industry then. And I think somewhere like Obsidian, you know, I've just been really lucky in that they do, like, a lot of the games that they make are very narrative heavy. They, you know, have a lot of writers in the studio. We have a pretty robust narrative department, and the collaboration with other departments is really fun and cool. So I feel like I definitely found that right fit for me.
Out of curiosity, do you communicate? Because I know when you was on ILP the last time, talked about collaborations with other studios that Microsoft owns. Do you talk to a lot of the narrative-focused people on other studios a lot?
Yeah, I would say more so I talk with narrative people than like a random programmer or, you know, like maybe occasionally if an artist or something had a narrative question, but you know, my area of expertise is kind of limited to like our tool set and how we build things. So usually it would be, you know, a meeting of the minds to try and be like, how do you guys do stuff? And, you know, what problems did you run into? And just comparing notes, that type of stuff.
I got another question. What kind of key qualities are important when learning to write for a team? And how do you split up writers? That's what they were asking. I don't know if that's something that you...
Okay, yeah. Again, I think it's really important when you're working at a game studio, especially if you're not the only writer there. You know, if you're working with other writers or you're in a team with other developers, the main thing to remember is like, you're just one person in the team. You're not, your stuff is not the most precious. You're not the most important person. And it can take a while. Like, I think everyone kind of is like, hey, I like this idea. It's really important to me. So it can take a while to get to the point where you're like, everyone feels that way. It's important to think about the larger perspective and like, what do we have time for? How cool would this be? Are other people on board? That type of stuff. And especially with like, if you end up having to share a character, which sometimes happens, or maybe you inherit a character from someone, or due to scheduling, you have to move on to a different area and you're handing off your work to someone else to maintain. It's important to improve what they have. You know, you're going to like polish it up. You're going to bug fix it. Maybe you're going to add to it. But, you know, if you can like save at least the spirit of what they're trying to accomplish, I think that goes a long way. Like, you don't always want to come in and just like steamroll all the work that everyone else has done before you. Yeah,
It's like
because I mean, you could, but
it's like I know you spent years working on this character, but it's not your character anymore. It's my
yeah,
character.
yeah, like you could, but I just and maybe sometimes it's called for. Maybe you're stepping in because the direction of the character needs to change, and you've been asked to do that, or you think it's better to do that. But I think if you do that all the time, then other people might not want to give you their stuff.
So I do. Someone did. I'm only gonna ask two more questions out of this chat because I do want to let you go. So someone asked, how many writers is typically in a AAA game on your standpoint? Is it usually? I think that would determine mainly about what type of game, if they take it, narrative seriously or not. Because I do feel like that's one of the things that's made Obsidian such a successful company, is because they're like, we care about gameplay and narrative almost equally. So I don't know if you can answer how many writers you guys have. I don't know if that's something that you could say. You can answer that if you want, but I will leave that.
Actually, would have to pull it up and count how many we have across all the different projects.
But it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, we do have a lot. Some studios, I think it depends on how long the game is in production, the size of the game, how much writing goes into the game. Because a game like Obsidian, if you're dealing with hey, we've got 1 million words in this game versus a game that's also AAA but maybe only has 30,000 or something like that, that's a big difference. Because I think, I could be wrong, but I think God of War, which had an amazing narrative in my opinion, I think they only had 3 or 4 full-time writers on that. They might have had more on contract, I'm not sure. But then when I saw the credits for oh gosh, why does my brain always do this? I don't know why my brain is blanking out, but basically a different RPG. They had 17 writers in the credits, so it really just depends on the studio and how they decide to staff up.
And plus, I think it goes off what they're kind of making. God of War is more of a kind of a narrative, single straight line type of game. And when you make a game like you guys generally make, there's a lot of different branching paths. You have a lot of NPCs talking to, so you got to write all of that. So I think that would require more people generally. So I got one last question from Flame. He is an inspiring writer. So shout out to Flame. He's a good dude.
Very cool.
He said, question for the royalty. When writing important moments for characters or stories, how do you put yourself in that scenario to perfectly capture it?
Wow.
It's a deep question, man.
I don't know. Does every writer approach it different? I would be interested to hear from other people in the chat who write what you guys do. I think for myself, it always involves a lot of daydreaming, right? Playing out different scenarios, trying to imagine how you would feel or how you would react, or embodying the character. And then I know Pixar talks about this a lot. They're really big into drawing on your own life experiences and translating that into the story. So it's if you recently had a kid, they want you to be working on a story where that's about a new parent or something like that, because you can directly draw the unique experiences from your life and make that movie more authentic and more emotionally resonant and stuff like that. Now, a lot of what we do pure fiction, so it's I'm not ever going to have a scenario where it's oh, I just committed mass genocide or something like that. So that's not a case where you draw from one-to-one personal life experience, but maybe you would think about a time that motivated you to make a bad decision or something like that. What would compel you to take more and more extremes, or so you just try and what if a lot of things and think about past experiences, or I don't know, just straight up role play and imagine fantasy different stuff, I guess.
So pretty much what you're saying is it just depends on what you're going through at the time. Like you said, certain other studios or people in other industries will have you captivate. Oh, she just had a kid, so she has a lot of emotions tied into her newborn. So let's have her write something about newborns, because that would probably, elevate that type of writing, because that's what she's passionate about at that time. We got a $10 super chat from Don Otaku. Dang, I'm late. I'll listen later, but great guest. I've just wanted to support while I can. I really appreciate you coming on here. That's all the questions we're doing, guys. I gotta let her go home, man. I gotta let her go home. I assume you're at the studio.
Oh,
I saw.
actually, no, I'm working from my home office right now. But
Oh, I saw people walking in the background, so I was
oh,
like,
that was my husband.
oh, so I didn't know who. I
Sorry.
obviously I didn't know
Yeah.
to point that out, but
A
you
lot
know,
of people are in the office right now, but we're doing a hybrid model where like some people are at home full time, some people are in the office certain days, some people go in the morning and then go home in the afternoon. It's pretty cool. I like the flexibility. So,
it's just like it's like I said. I feel like look, we can give criticism on certain things that's going on, but I do feel like we as especially influencers, the armchair developers on Twitter that feel like they know jobs better than actual people that actually do the jobs. I feel like we gotta do a better thing about being compassionate to what people do because this thing's not easy. And it's like, what we were saying on just the branching paths alone. That's probably the entire development right there. Like, that's crazy. The amount of work that goes into something like that. So, I appreciate you coming on, giving more perspective of being a senior writer. Because, especially something like writing, I'm not a writer. I'm always 100% open with that. We have a website, and I'm like, I don't write. I don't write. I'll do a video. I don't mind doing a video, but me and writing have never got along. I failed ninth grade English twice. So it's just like me and writing don't get. Math, I'm okay at. I'm pretty decent at math, but no, not writing. And it's always interesting to see how people in different industries take writing different ways. And I love that you came on and just gave a little bit more perspective of it was like, especially working at a studio like Obsidian, because I think it's different than working for someone like Obsidian that is a well-developed studio that's made multiple games like Fallout New Vegas, Stick of Truth, KOTOR. I think it's different from stuff like that than like a brand new studio that doesn't really have a whole lot to show and hasn't had a history, because I feel like you will put yourself more on I gotta prove myself more than the average person, because you're looking back and be like, look what they've made, and I'm involved in their newer stuff, so I gotta be on my top of my game. I feel like there's a lot of pressure onto it that a lot of people won't give people credit for, especially how extra Twitter is on judging stuff.
well, I think too is one thing I like to think about it is like almost like literally everybody I work with, it came in kind of the same way, which is like they're really big fans of video games. They like playing video games and they wanted to work on video games. They tried really hard to get into the industry and then eventually got in, and now they're making video games and they're trying to do it the best that they can. We're still human, so mistakes happen, or maybe I like, especially like, have you seen that meme where it's like how you picture it in your head and it's like the Picasso or Van Gogh version of like, oh, this is beautiful, and then how you do it is like the stick figure, like the execution didn't match up. So I feel like that even happens to like someone with a ton of experience. Like I'll always be like, this is the ideal version in my head, and then when I'm trying to build it, I'm like, why is it not perfect, right? So and there's only so many like time, resources, and then priority of like how important is this in the game overall versus something else. Do you want to work on this game, or like do we want to make this game for like 15 years, or do we want to try and get it to people in like 3 years, something like that. So but I do think that most of the people here really care, they're really passionate, they're doing their best, and they also listen to people. So when we put a game out and it gets certain criticism, we try to improve that on the next thing that we do. So yeah, but I mean, I appreciate people playing. I want to like bring entertainment into people's lives. I want to make your life better for having experienced our stuff. I don't ever want to like accidentally waste someone's time or something like that. So it's like, we're trying our best and hopefully we're able to execute on it. But I guess you can't ever always, perfectly pull everything off. So
you can't satisfy 100% of people. It's impossible. You can only aim to, try to satisfy as many people as possible. But, I appreciate you coming on, Megan. You could plug your Twitter and stuff if you want to. I know you're not really on there a whole lot.
Yeah, I feel bad. Not on as much, but yeah.
I do see you, like, promoting books and stuff on there. So, maybe you want to promote some type of work that's going in?
Well, I haven't. My book was like 2 years ago, so I feel bad. But yeah, I mean, if people are interested in for an occasional tweet, Fictivate. But I would say, yeah, during the pandemic, I started, and I don't know if anybody else has really felt this way or not, but it might have been like as I got a little older, or maybe because of the pandemic, I started feeling like social media, like too much exposure was like increasing my anxiety, or maybe I was putting too many hours a day into it. And so I basically just cut out the majority of social media use in my day to day life and only check in occasionally. And I feel much more like chill and relaxed for it.
What's funny is I think because I'm like a content creator, I'm a podcaster. Um, we're literally the sleeve of Twitter, so we get the
Yeah.
most feedback from everyone. Like, look, developers might get feedback off their games, but most people don't know who to talk to for a thing. Like, if if they don't like something that Obsidian made, they're gonna blame Obsidian as a whole. Like, no individual person really, maybe besides the lead, the leads. But content creators, I make content every day people don't like. So I'm
Yeah.
constant, and I think because of that, I've I've just breathed in all of that, and it doesn't bother me anymore.
Oh,
It used
that's
to bother
good.
me. It used to bother me, like the comment section. That's the people will tell you that all the time. Don't read the comment section. I read the comment section. I don't
Oh,
care.
really?
Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and it's like I said, I'm gonna do more of these guys. Like I didn't get to every question because I made it very vocal because I know how these chat is. Because when it comes to educational stuff, you'll have less people show up because it's not entertaining. Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to amp everything up 24/7. But I appreciate you coming on, and until next week, I will have a dev on next week. Hopefully, you guys enjoy it. It's a turn-based RPG, so I hope you guys enjoy it. And until next time, this is Gaming Addict and Megan, and we hope you guys have a good day.
All
Peace.
right. See you guys. Thank you.